Today we bring you the English version of Ancestral Wisdom meets technology. Tune in now. This episode brings forward the natives' voices and cutting-edge ideas together. Welcome to the next episode of Código Mujer Central, PA First Latina podcast. Today we travel to the heart of the Amazon to explore how ancestral wisdom and technology unite to support indigenous communities. From Amazon Ecology Peru and Garza Viva, we're honored to welcome Campbell Plowden and Tulio Davila. Stay with us for stories of resilience, innovation, and a future built together. Let's go.
My name is Campbell Plowden, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Amazon Community Ecology, which for short we call Amazon Ecology.
Okay. Well, my name is Tulio Davila. I am Peruvian. I am president of Amazon Ecology in Peru. Well, hablo español y nada, estoy acá en Estados Unidos para atender esta reunión.
Could you start from the beginning how you decided to move to the Amazon and work with the indigenous to create a sustainable living?
Sure. Well, I had been working for the conservation of tropical forests since 1987. And I worked with the Greenpeace organization for several years at the global advocacy level, trying to convince entities like the World Bank to stop funding major destructive projects. And I came to the realization that I really wanted to work more at the local level to help people who live in the forest to find a sustainable way to live without harming the forest. So I started the Center for Amazon Community Ecology in 2006 with the specific purpose of wanting to help people in the forest sustainably harvest and make value-added products from the forest in a way that would benefit their lives, support communities, and support forest conservation. So now, almost 20 years later, Amazon Ecology now works with several hundred artisans from 18 different indigenous and campesino communities in the northern Peruvian Amazon. And our main focus is to work with these artisans to help them make and market innovative fair trade handicrafts so that they can make a living without harming the forest.
How did you bring workshops to the community to help them to improve their market?
Well, we first started by looking at essential oils. Particularly, there was an aromatic tree resin called copal, which was a fascinating example to me of the rich ecology that you find in a tropical forest. But unfortunately, while distilling the resin from these trees produced a very novel and potentially commercially valuable essential oil, the reality was that there just were not enough trees around to support a viable commercial enterprise. So while I was out there doing this research, women from the village kept coming up to me and saying, will you buy our handicrafts? And it finally came to my thick skull that this was a much better way to try to benefit more people. So we started out by buying the crafts that they were already making, but we found fairly quickly that these crafts just did not have much market appeal in this country in particular. That while they might have been good enough to sell to tourists from time to time in Peru, you needed to make different products with much higher quality to find an alternative market for these products in the US. So we started out by trying to figure out how could we work with artisans using the materials that they were already used to making with techniques that they already had, but making products that would be different. And then as the demand for these products was really not growing very well, and we started growing to different villages, we realized that we needed to come up with different products because we just didn't have enough of a market for the belts and some of the other early products in order to justify training new artisans to make these things. So we hit on Christmas tree ornaments as an area that could use their creativity in an almost unlimitless way.
So, Tulio, I understand that you joined Amazon Ecology in 2016. What was your role then?
Work in communications in the institutions, photography and documentary, different activities in the communities, in the city. With the time, my obligations grow up. I started see the different activities, other activities. In 2020, okay, Tulio, president of Amazon Ecology in Peru. Okay, nice. I hope to do a good job.
I would like to know what inspired you to dedicate your life to working with indigenous community in the Amazon?
Well, as I said, for me, I developed a passion for wanting to do something for nature back in high school. I was a child of the very first Earth Day in 1970. And when I got involved in environmental work, I worked for the conservation of the whales for many years. And when we started to finally make some progress in cutting down on the number of whales being killed, the number of countries involved, we started hearing about the loss of tropical forests as really the ultimate threat to species on the planet. And so I made my first trip to the Amazon in 1987 to get an overview of what was happening in the region and saw examples of how logging, ranching, conversion of forests to plantations of various sorts was damaging the forest and also having an impact on the people. On the positive side, there was an example of a group of rubber tappers in Brazil that were showing how you could create not just a sustainable way to harvest forest products, but a whole social system where people living in the forest could work together to create value-added products in a way that could preserve the forest and create viable economic livelihoods for them. It was taken for granted, though, that there were indigenous communities that were living in harmony with nature. And that's true to some extent, but it falsely assumed that indigenous communities wanted to remain the way that they have always remained. And it's very clear that many indigenous communities want to develop. They just want to develop in a way that respects their culture and a way that can help them receive some of the benefits from our modern lifestyle. And so when I went back to school to get a PhD in ecology, I worked with a group of indigenous communities in the Brazilian Amazon to study the ecology, management, and marketing of non-timber forest products to see what would be the potential for these native communities to harvest the products that they already knew well, but do it in a way that could generate some income for them. And the conclusion of those studies was that it's just not viable for people to collect forest products and sell them as raw materials and hope to make a good living. So the basic starting point for Amazon ecology is that people in the forest, when they're harvesting forest products, have to be turning those into value-added products in order for them to achieve some real economic benefit from that.
How do the workshop help artisans both preserve their traditionals and adapt to the modern markets?
Sure. Well, when we first started working in communities and we were making the new products, nobody knew how to make them. So we were really depending on the initiative of whichever artisans came up with some new way to make these new crafts in a way that looked attractive. And so we started by contracting them to be teachers in the other workshops so they could teach their peers how to do it. And what we found was that just because somebody is good at making something doesn't necessarily mean that they are good at teaching someone else how to do it. And so one thing that we have done that I feel very proud of is that before I got involved in this organization, I was involved with a group called the Alternatives to Violence Project, or AVP. And this is a program where we work with people in prisons, in community groups, to help them improve their communication, cooperation, and nonviolent conflict resolution skills. And so we introduced this program to Peru. And we found that it was a really good way to work with the artisans who had been used to working on their own, who had been used to guarding their secrets of how to make things to themselves. Because before, when there was a limited market, there was no incentive for them to share their skills because they would see it as empowering their competitors. But when we could open up a bigger market, then they needed to learn both the mechanisms of how to work collaboratively and the emotional aspect of how to trust and work with other people. So we now have 3 different workshops in this tier of the artisan training programs. So the basic workshop, someone is learning how to make, let's say, 1 or 2 birds in a couple of days. And then if they practice after that and get better, we invite them to an advanced workshop, where then they are expected to make something to export quality. And the artisans that then show their even higher level of commitment, we invite them to a training for artisan facilitators. So in that workshop, they are learning both how to teach their skills to others in an effective way and how to build the self-esteem, respect the self-esteem of the artisans in that workshop. So they're really learning 2 different sets of skills as they become artisan facilitators within our realm. The other aspect of the work is that we work with artisans who want to work together to formalize an association. And so they're learning the mechanics of what it takes to form an organization, how to develop the leadership skills to guide a group, how to do the marketing so that once they have their products, they know how to present them effectively to tourists who may visit their village, or how to do the quality control that's needed in order to sell to a larger market of wholesale buyers. The other element then is the very critical one respecting the environment, which is that in the past, people would just harvest the chambira leaves, these leaves that come from the palm trees growing opportunistically, but now they have a bigger demand for these products. So we're working with them to learn how to collect the seeds, how to do a backyard nursery, how to cultivate those seedlings, how to plant them in their fields, and then finally, when they get large enough, how to properly harvest them so they don't damage the other leaves, so they can have an ongoing sustainable source of raw materials to go into this growing demand for the handicrafts that they make. But we certainly recognize that in order for the artisans in a community to generate more income together, then at least some of them need to become effective leaders. Because, as we know, no group can function without some structure, without some people taking leadership roles in whatever way they want to structure sharing the responsibilities that's needed to guide any organization. And it's been really great to see that some of the women who have come up through the artisan organizations have now become leaders in other ways within their community. So we've seen the role of women, artisans initially, growing into their role as leaders within the artisan community and then becoming leaders within their communities in general. And we're really happy to see that happening.
What motivated you to create the Amazon Ecology, Peru, and Garza Viva?
There are 2 main reasons why we wanted to start Amazon Ecology in Peru and Garza Viva. One is that when we are seeking ways to fund the program work in Peru, from a U.S. nonprofit point of view, we were able to get certain grants from foundations to support our work in Peru. But there are also other foundations that will only fund activities in a country to an organization that is based in that country. So it was a strategic decision to start Amazon Ecology Peru so that we could have a broader potential source of financial support to fund our activities in country. But the other longer term reason is that we wanted to have Peruvians in charge of doing the program work in Peru, that it just makes much more sense from every conceivable point of view that we would have Peruvians deciding what programs would be the priorities, seeking funding to run those programs, and making the critical decisions about when and how to work with our partners down there. So we've steadily worked towards a way where the U.S. organization would be supporting the work in Peru, not Peru being an entity working for the entity established in the United States.
We want to know, what challenges have you faced when trying to secure funding or donations, and how can people help support your mission?
Sure. Well, up until now, Amazon Ecology activities have been supported, I would say, from three major sources of funding. One that I just mentioned is that we have been able to get relatively small grants from certain foundations to support the work in Peru. Secondly, we have a page on the Global Giving platform, which is a way for us to try to attract donations from individuals to support our work there. The other type of donation, if you call it another category, is to try to identify individuals who have, frankly, more money than the average person and are able to give gifts that are in the thousands of dollars instead of tens and hundreds of dollars. And so there are a relatively few number of people who have supported us in that way. The other partial source of support is by our sale of the handicrafts. So when we buy the crafts from our artisan partners, we pay them up front for the crafts that we have received from them. So our commitment to them is satisfied. When we sell the crafts, then clearly we have to cover our costs for what we've paid for the crafts, the cost of marketing, and for instance, when we go to a festival, we have to pay a vendor fee in order to sell them. In order to sell online, we have to cover those costs of promoting things online. But we do generate some profit from our sale of the crafts, and so we reinvest 20% of our net sales to reinvest in our community partners to support health, education, and conservation needs in our partner communities in proportion to the amount of crafts that we have sold from each of those villages. But the challenges of doing this are very strong, and we're well aware of that. And when the economy is tight, then obviously people are making very, very careful decisions about how to spend whatever money they have. So we really need to do the best that we can to promote our work through our newsletter, through social media, through direct opportunities like this to share people about the work that we do, how it's benefiting people in remote communities that have a more difficult time to speak for themselves outside of their communities. And people can make their own decisions about, is it important for me to try to support Amazon conservation through this particular organization? We hope that they will.
So looking forward the future, what are your hopes for the next generation of artisans and forest protectors in the Amazon?
Well, I think my vision certainly is that we will continue to see a transition, that the previous generation of artisans was very limited in terms of what they could do. In the village of Rio Nuevo, for instance, a woman might go out and harvest 10, 20 cogollos, 20 leaves of a chambira tree to make one hammock. And she might spend a whole week making that one hammock, and then she would have to pay to go from her remote village into the city and sell that hammock to a souvenir shop for maybe 15, 20, if she's really lucky, $30. Well, now we're seeing a transition where people are being able to work with groups like us. And if they have lucky enough to have tourists who visit their village, then they have two potential markets. So they can sell directly to tourists and make whatever they think the tourists will want, or they can work with groups like ours to try to come up with very high quality products in greater volumes with greater consistency. And our hope is that there will be more artisans who will see this as a viable option for them. That instead of having to leave the village and go work in some office in the city or some manual labor job in the city, where maybe they get a regular paycheck, but they're away from their village, so they can't grow their own food, they can't hunt, they can't fish, they don't have their family with them. So our hope is that we will be able to take part in this development, if you will, of villages where people have a choice, where they don't have to leave the village in order to have a better life, because they can have access to the internet and try to use that in a constructive way instead of, we know all ways that people can use social media in ways that aren't so good. But it's a powerful tool that can help people in remote areas access markets, access communications that they did not have access to before. And so if these people who want to have their kid be able to go to a school in the city, they want to have some of the benefits of modern society in the village, they don't have to leave those villages in order to do that. And that's really, I think, one of our key goals, is that there are millions of hectares of protected areas of forest that have been created. But those parks only exist as lines on a map unless the people who live in and near those forests can stay there. And they will not stay there unless they have access to a decent income, to decent schools, to decent healthcare. And so we think that we can be part of providing healthier communities where people want to stay and really have a future for the Amazon, where people are still living in the forest in a good way.
And are you satisfied with the legacy that you're leaving behind, or do you think that there's something else that you want to improve?
Oh, my legacy personally is still very much a work in progress. I'm very happy that we now have Tulio, Julie, and Andrea as our core three-person team in Iquitos. They're forming a team that I see has great potential to evolve Amazon ecology in Peru as an entity that can stand on its own and progress. The key part that we still really need a lot of work on is here in the US. I'm clearly wanting to get to a place where I can retire, where I can spend more time with my brand new grandchild, where I can write the books that I want to about my life. And in order to do that, we need to get beyond me going to festival after festival. So we really need to develop our wholesale accounts with stores like 10,000 Villages, with stores like Wild Birds Unlimited, where we can be selling thousands and thousands of crafts as a way that's a viable business to support an entity here in the US and provide enough opportunities for our artisan partners in Peru to have an ongoing source of income on a year-round basis.
But so it's just like Spanish, or you have to learn another traditional language, like native language from Peru?
Well, we work in communities with Bora, Huitoto, Okaina, Yawa, Maijuna, Kokama. So I think I'm pretty good at learning foreign languages. So I feel, I'm fortunate that all the communities where we work, they're all Spanish-speaking people. There are certain elders in some communities where their native language is their first language, but we've been able to function quite well just being able to work in Spanish in those places.
That's great.
I have another question. Most of us are from South America, and we are well aware of the challenges and the importance of bringing awareness to the Amazon jungle. But I'm curious how much of the Amazon you know, because there are so many different places within Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. So I'm curious whether if you have visited most of it.
Oh, certainly not. The areas that I know of the Amazon, again, in 1987, I did a tour where I spent 3 months traveling through different parts of the Brazilian Amazon. so I could get to know a little bit about the major activities that were having impact on the region. And then after a couple of years, when it seemed that it was time to start applying some of those lessons that we were learning in the very secluded research area and bring it out to communities, a friend who had worked in a number of places introduced me. So this is how I kind of got started. And they would introduce me and say, hey, here's this guy who's interested in doing something with you. Would you like to talk to him? And so that was really how we started, was I would introduce myself, say, here's who I am. I'm interested in working with you on forest products or handicraft development, and start very small. Because developing relationships with people over time is really the only way that you can make progress in these communities, because change happens very slowly and you need to earn people's trust, and that trust takes time.
I have a question. I see you have a lot of stuff on the table. Can you explain us a little bit which materials are made from?
Sure. Well, I'll start with, I guess just to review the story a little bit. So, here's my belt. So we started with the belt, and we found that this is a really neat product, but it didn't sell that well. We then developed the guitar straps, really neat product, and I had fantasies that certain famous musicians would put a guitar strap on and show it on the concerts, and then we'd sell 1 million of them. That didn't happen. So then we were working with baskets. And these were really neat products that were selling well in certain villages where tourists were buying them. And to me, this really typifies some of the beauty of the tradition of this work here, because this basket is made with natural plant dyes. So for instance, this yellow comes from the root of a plant they call guisador, which is a close relative of our turmeric. This orange comes from the oily substance around the seed of the achiote. The red here comes from the leaf of a vine they call sisa. The green comes from the leaves of the cocona and pihuayo palm trees. And let's see, do we have a dark here? No, that's it. So the process is they go into the forest, they harvest a leaf, they take the spines off, then they very meticulously grasp a leaf with their toes and then pull the fibers out. Then they have to wash and dry those fibers. Then they go out and collect the dye plants. Then they boil the dye plants with the fiber to dye it. And then they can begin to start making whatever it is that they're making. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the key products that really started moving us in a positive growth direction were the ornaments. So when I first visited the village of San Francisco on the Marañón River, they were making some pretty crude birds. And it was kind of like another light bulb went off. It's like, okay, we now have some animal ornaments that have some potential here. So our contribution was I started bringing in photos of the actual birds so they could try to replicate exact species. And I brought these up to the US. Well, the feedback I got was, those are beautiful, colorful birds. We don't know what they are. We're not going to buy them. So the clear signal was, you need to have the artisans down there make things that people here are familiar with. So then we went into phase 2, which is, here are the birds that people know from their backyard bird feeders. So we have the red cardinal, the yellow goldfinch, the bluebird. And as soon as we started doing that, then our sales started picking up. And then there was this woman named Doilit from a village called Genaro Herrera, who was our butterfly whisperer. She was a woman who had started to study biology, but then had to stay at home to take care of her family. But when she started working with us, she had this idea of going out and collecting actual butterflies and then laying them down on a piece of paper, drawing a template, and then embroidering the detailed designs. And so she and her family came up with a morpho butterfly. which is an iconic species from the Amazon and other parts of Latin America. And again, some people in the US, like, if they've traveled down there, it's like, oh, I think I recognize that blue butterfly. But it wasn't until we came up with this, which everyone in the US knows as the monarch butterfly. So these are now one of our top selling ornaments, and we also do these in hair clips. Well, chambira is clearly the most important raw material for making these crafts, but there are other materials that are also very popular. So this is a manatee that is found both in Florida in the US, as well as there is a species in freshwater in the Amazon. And this is made from balsa wood, which down there they call topa. Now, as I mentioned, mostly we deal with non-timber forest products because it's very difficult to cut down old trees and expect that you're going to have sustainable harvest. But the balsa wood is an exception because it grows very, very fast. So this is not a hard tree to manage sustainably. The other type of material that we use a lot is the calabash tree pod. Now, some people know calabash or calabaza as a gourd, a member of the family of pumpkins, etc. But it has the same common name, but biologically it's quite distinct. So this tree has the wonderful property of having fruits that can be this size, the size of an egg, the size of a cantaloupe, up to the size of a watermelon. So people in the Amazon have planted these trees in their backyard gardens for millennia because you can produce a container or a bowl of any size that you want from this. But this is a beautiful craft for us because it's both an ornament, because it's beautifully etched with a wildlife design, and it has the seeds of the achira inside. So we now actually sell this half and half. Half to people who want it as an ornament, and half to people who wanted a really nice, handy little hand maraca instrument. So that's a quick overview of some of the forest plants that we work with.
So I know that people is not as brave as you are, that just went in and moved into the jungle and start working with the artisans. What would you say to the younger generation to follow their dreams? How can they start?
What can I say? I feel lucky that, as I mentioned, when I was growing up, I was very fortunate that my father worked for a company that led him to travel. And so I had an opportunity to live in Australia, then Brazil, then India, before I was 12 years old. So I had a feeling for the world and both the advantages and the challenges associated with living in foreign cultures. But for me, there was no other way of life. So I've lived in Japan, I've lived in Brazil, I've lived in other countries, I've visited 45 countries. And so for me, there is no better way of life than to try to get to know other cultures, because you test yourself. You see what your values are, you see what you're attracted to, you see what's difficult for you, and hopefully you grow through that process. So for young people, my hope is that whatever their interests are, they can be open to the world and pay attention to what excites them, pay attention to what moves them at an emotional level, and think, okay, I'm passionate about this. How can I make a difference in the world? And it may not be their job, but certainly everyone has an opportunity to make a difference in the world, whether it's a hobby, whether it's being of service, supporting a nonprofit organization, or if you're lucky enough and committed enough, find a way to make that the way that you make your living.
Thank you for your kind words. Is there something else that you want to share before we wrap it up?
Sure. Well, for anyone who is listening to this broadcast, I would ask, if you like what you've heard from us, we would love to have your support. We would love to have your financial support. We would love for you to buy the products, the crafts that are made by our artisan partners. One thing that's a pet peeve of mine is people come into our stall at a festival and say, "You have beautiful stuff." Well, to me, this is not stuff. These are beautiful works of art. And this is a way for people to make an investment in the future of the Amazon. So don't think about, "Oh my gosh, how can I spend this money on an ornament because I can go to Walmart and buy that for $4 that was made in a factory in China." Whatever your values are, think about ways that you can use what you buy to support your values. And the third way is certainly we need volunteers. I am the only and very partially poorly paid person in the US. We have a 3-person staff in Peru doing the work of 12 people. So there are many tasks that we would love to have help with as volunteers, whether that means working with us remotely to do discrete tasks that can be done online, or if you have a passion, we would love to welcome you to come to Iquitos and spend time with us in the field. And Tulio would be very happy to discuss what that opportunity might look like for someone who is passionate about actually visiting our communities and supporting our work inside Peru.
Where they can find you in the social media, or there is a website where they can find these products?
Sure. Our main website is www.amazonecology.org. We're also on Facebook at Amazon Ecology. We're also on Instagram at Amazon Ecology.
Well, thank you to accept this invitation to Código Mujer, Central PA First Latina Podcast.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.